English translation, 584th contact Saturday, the 5th of April 2014, 13:29 hours.
Hello, Eduard, my friend.
Ah, you are here already. I was only a short time in the print shop of Atlantis. Greetings and welcome. I am glad that you are coming, even though there is no correction work today.
It can also be that we can simply enjoy a conversation without having to devote ourselves to any work first.
Of course, and as you probably assume, I still have some questions, so you are right about that. If it is all right with you, I would like to discuss this here unofficially. Christian Frainer gave it to me, because I told him that I also want to talk to you about the tiresome thing and hear what you think about it. But first I want to tell you what I have advised from my side and what Christian has already passed on. And if you want to read through this, please.
In regard to what is written here, I can only say that when I look at the statements of both sides, I agree with your advice in every respect. I think that you should also repeat it in my name about Christian, so that he can pass everything on to everything is unfortunate. But I think it should have been foreseen by that the whole thing could not have gone well because of completely different personal interests, as well as an age difference, from which a serious degree of inexperience in life resulted from the younger side, but which also gave rise to illusory expectations and ideas on both sides in some respects, instead of a neutral point of view.
Then I will try to explain everything to Christian again so that he can pass on your and my advice to both parties. But thanks for your clarification. But what I want to say is that in such situations it is very difficult for the human beings to remain neutral in order to be able to judge all facts correctly. But how can the human being do that if the politicians cannot remain neutral? As is unfortunately also the case in Switzerland, where it is claimed that real neutrality is exercised, which in my opinion is not the case, because by neutrality I understand something else. I do not see what is happening in terms of interaction with the EU as neutral behavior, because Switzerland is gradually allowing itself to be bought by the EU. Or what do you think? How should we understand the whole thing?
What you say is correct, because acting in relation to various treaties concluded with the EU by Swiss politicians violated Switzerland's neutrality, namely, in relation to those treaties by which Switzerland adopted and implemented EU law and EU regulations, etc., which contain laws, regulations, and ordinances that are foreign to the Swiss state. Switzerland's neutrality has thus been grossly violated, and Switzerland has been made a follower of the EU, also in cases where Switzerland has no full legal link with all EU laws and regulations. A thing, however, which is constantly threatening Switzerland by those who are willing to betray their homeland and drive them into EU dictatorship. If Switzerland is to maintain its neutrality, then, on the one hand, it must never join the EU as a member. But on the other hand, efforts are also unavoidable to break away from the dictatorial treaties with the EU. It is further to be said that true neutrality of a country, and thus also of Switzerland, requires that such neutrality must exist in every respect. This means that a neutral country may not sell to other states any weapons, machines, vehicles, aircraft, etc. of any kind whatsoever, nor any other material which may be used for the purposes of insurrection, war, etc., or for the suppression or killing of individuals, groups of people, or entire peoples. Neither may it interfere with the policies of other states. And consequently, no country may be recognized as a new state that declares itself autonomous, as Switzerland did the opposite with regard to Kosovo. Such action represents a blatant breach of neutrality, because as a neutral state, a territory that is breaking away from a group may only be recognized as an autonomous and independent state if this has already been done previously by the international community. The fact that a Federal Council of Switzerland, using a stupid excuse, did not take part in the 2014 Paralympic Games in Sochi, even though this was intended, also constitutes a breach of neutrality. This is because the refusal to attend the games was for political reasons, in order to punish Russia or its President Putin, so to speak. This does not mean, however, that Putin's power-hungry actions were and are right-wing, because he, like the EU, also acts in a purely dictatorial manner. However, representing a neutrality such as that of Switzerland, which you mentioned, means much more than just what I mentioned in a few words, because real neutrality can only exist if it is consciously respected in all areas and nuances. In this way, a government must never interfere in the interests of other states, whether political, military, economic, religious, ideological, or in any other form, and also not in such a way that intended or already promised state visits or any other important visits to foreign governments and organizations, etc., are canceled or simply not respected. True neutrality inevitably requires that it be respected and represented in every way, and that a neutral state does not allow itself to be forced by other states or alliances of states into things, actions, laws, regulations, treaties, etc., which violate neutrality. True neutrality only allows a peaceable and neutral mediating role to be exercised in foreign states with regard to special concerns, events, and situations if such a role is requested or desired by the foreign states. But with regard to true neutrality, there are many factors to be mentioned and explained which are very far-reaching and which I cannot mention in a short time. So I will leave it at that which has been explained.
That is actually quite a lot, but I have a question about it. How do you feel about neutrality?
We cultivate it in a very serious way.
But what is it like in relation to your federation?
On all the worlds of our federation, the same laws, rights, and regulations apply, both to the world governments of the different worlds and to the governments of the people. Our Ptaah world government is the guideline for all other world governments, as it is also the case for the governments of the people. No world government, as well as no people's government, which you call, for example, cantonal or district and municipal government, etc., interferes in any way in the interests of others because they maintain neutrality throughout.
On the 1st of March, you said that you Ptaah on other worlds of your federation are entitled to intervene in emergency situations or in the maintenance of order, etc. What about your neutrality?
Interventions are only made according to established treaties with the different worlds. But such interventions do not mean more than assistance, which, above all, is only given when it is demanded by the majority of the respective world population.
By aid, I mean aid that is really only aimed at doing the best possible for the benefit of the respective populations. I also understand that this does not mean going to arms, but really only providing assistance. But what is it like when situations and events of violence occur on any world of your federation?
Then these are matters which have to be settled by the respective forces of order of the respective Federation worlds. And this in a way which corresponds to non-Gewalt, note Billy. Non-Gewalt means active use without harmful Gewalt. Ton. In such things, if such things arise at all, which is extremely rare, we Ptaah have no authority to interfere and become action-oriented. If, however, a decision is made by the respective world population to provide mediatory and advisory assistance, then we may, of course, become active in this way.
I see, then that is also settled. But there is something else. As you know, the day before yesterday, I asked Florina to ask you if I could retrieve some of the statements you made in our private conversation last Saturday and write down what you agreed to. So I retrieved the relevant part of the interview and wrote it down, giving it the title, "The Descent of the Human Beings Through Unemployment Consists of 5 Phases." With regard to your explanation, which, as you know, is related to a particular matter, I thought that your explanations might be useful to many human beings, just as they read the lines and think things through carefully, to avoid the threat of what you are saying. For this reason, I ask you whether or not I can include your statement in our official conversation report today?
There is nothing to prevent the inclusion.
Thanks. Then I will insert the whole thing in the report of the conversation immediately in place of my current words, which I am saying right now.
The descent of the human beings through unemployment consists of 5 phases.
First phase. The human being who still has a regular job, has a decent wage and bread, and he or she maintains intact relationships with fellow human beings, family and acquaintances and friends. He lives in a flat or a room, is sufficiently provided for financially and materially, and is thus independent. However, if he loses his job through some stupid act or behavior, such as theft, dispute, due to insufficient work performance or work rationalization, etc., then everything deteriorates very quickly. The human being affected by it falls into wrong subjective thoughts and the resulting feelings that he has only bad luck in life, and therefore he inevitably feels less happy than before, but is still optimistic enough to believe that he can find work again without help from outside, or as a result of confused thoughts and opinions, even become independent. His family, as well as his acquaintances and friends, are also usually still confident and naive enough to believe that he can get himself out of the misery again on his own. This is especially true because the human being who is unemployed often gets entangled in lies and untruths with explanations and does not see reality and its truth as they are effective. This phase, however, is very often a denial of the effective truth. It is usually a fact that such a state of affairs very quickly reduces the willingness to work, the search for work, and the willingness to be employed to zero if work is not found again immediately. Second phase. At this stage of initial unemployment, the human being is now literally affected. He is now forced to stop earning his money and to earn his scarce income through the Unemployment Insurance Fund or the Social Welfare Office. He has to work his meagre income by filling out dozens of forms that humiliate him, with details of his previous employment and all his private circumstances. His family, acquaintances and friends lose respect for him, and instead of love, only pity and contempt are shown to him. As an additional demoralization, he is forced to seek work ex officio and to disclose his necessities of life. He is also forced to commit himself to dubious employers for short-term work, etc. Furthermore, he is expected to show submissive gratitude for finding work and to cooperate in everything that is required of him. As soon as the office notices that he no longer fulfills his obligation to register as a beneficiary, his benefits will be cancelled, but until then, of course, time will elapse as determined by the relevant office. He may have to move out of his home if this becomes necessary, while he may now have to buy his clothes from a brothel or a second-hand shop and his food from a discount shop. Hope is not yet completely abandoned, and so the search for work continues. Even though the first psychosomatic complaints of doing nothing, or even brain damage from not thinking, and increased intraocular pressure from watching so much television are already apparent. Already at this stage, however, there are signs of mental, emotional, and psychological damage, and the first signs of psychopathic behavior. Third phase, if the human being still shows some initiative, the candidate for social welfare benefits tries to earn some money by doing small jobs. This is when he has still not found a job, and when the entitlement period for unemployment benefits has ended. Slowly, however, things are getting tighter and tighter, and the human being becomes more and more uncomfortable, because he realizes that it is too late for him to find work by himself, with the help of the authorities or through friends and acquaintances. This is the state in which he may already begin to search rubbish bins for recyclable materials in order to get some money. The unemployed human being's family, friends and acquaintances slowly turn their backs on him, and he becomes psychologically severely battered, also because he is no longer able to bear the social humiliation. As a result, he gradually falls more and more quickly into the state in which he visits the social welfare office, if he does so out of shame at all. He has to move from his flat to a simple room, leave his car because he is no longer allowed to use it, and he has to be insulted and harassed, and slips further and further. This is how he ends up stealing his clothes from old clothes collections and fetching his food from supermarket containers. In this phase, the human being quickly abandons himself because he is no longer able to wash, and he begins to consume alcohol and to drink effectively and to turn to vices and addictions which isolates him more and more from his fellow human beings and from society. Fourth phase. When self-created isolation appears, this is the point at which the actual deterioration takes place, and the human being slips into unwillingness to work. This state of affairs is accompanied by a glorification of antisocial behavior, which is generally regarded by society as undesirable and disgusting. The main feature of this state is now the constant and extremely high consumption of alcohol and the glorification of cirrhosis of the liver as a declared aim of life. The person unwilling to work then likes to brag to like-minded people, especially if he or she has only just survived life-threatening situations in a drunken stupor, or if he or she can hardly remember anything. In this state, the human being's attitude is also decisive in that he no longer takes the reactions to his antisocial behavior seriously, and they no longer make him think, but only amuse him, which is why taboo slogans and jokes and completely disrespectful behavior towards any higher authority also appear. Adapting to society, diligence, and good hygiene are also strictly rejected, as is any sporting activity. In this state of affairs, the human being generally has no more interests at all, just as he is also no longer interested in achieving anything of value in his life, either professionally or privately. This is also the reason why he usually only makes his living by begging, stealing, and parasitizing. It also follows from all this that the human being in this state is molesting his fellow human beings at anything and everything that he does not like, even if there are no logical reasons for this, because it is done completely illogically. After drinking alcohol, the human being's favourite pastime is to romp and laze about. The only thing that is left to do is loaf around, and what is crazy about it is that a certain complacency appears, which results from a complete indifference towards everything and everyone. This is accompanied by the fact that the human being no longer cleans his or her teeth, smokes a lot under certain circumstances, and in addition, constantly drinks himself or herself into a coma with high-proof alcohol. In this state, various maladjustments and a beginning change of character also occur, whereby speech also suffers and can only be spoken in a broken form or with slurred speech. This is the point in time when the political attitude slips into the so-called right or left scene, depending on the influences that are brought to bear. At this point, 65% to 80% of the brain is already atrophied and remains unused, irreparably deformed and destroyed. This is the latest point in time when the human being is finally incurable and completely rotten, and therefore can no longer be helped, but only watched sinking deeper and deeper. Fifth phase, the human being in the fifth phase is so indifferent to everything that he no longer cares what happens to him or around him. He is no longer interested in anything at all, so he also no longer tries to consciously register anything. He no longer cleans himself in the slightest, simply lets everything happen to him, no longer talks to other people, only begs, and no longer changes dirty and lice-ridden clothes. He does not even enjoy looking at something joyfully, and his health is getting worse and worse, because now other medical elements are appearing, such as depression, mouth rot and wounds, etc. This is the final stage of the former unemployment and the consequences of the human being not being able to work and not being able to do anything of value. The person affected by this cannot save himself from himself on his own initiative, so he only vegetates until the vermin have eaten him up. In the end, they become slummy and polluted, languish miserably, and die.
It may really be possible that one or the other Earth humans can benefit from this.
That is what I think it will be. But I have another question now. Because I read something, namely a forecast of the future situation that threatens Europe or the European Union in the next few years, namely that things will get out of hand. We have not been talking openly about political matters for a long time now, but this is the dictatorship of the EU. And I would like to know personally, also in the interest of the people who ask me, what is the situation as regards the human beings who are finally going to fight against this crazy dictatorship?
It is undeniable that social unrest has been going on for some time in various EU countries, and this is already a precursor to further and ever-increasing unrest, which in the coming years threatens to become more and more widespread in many EU countries, even to the point of civil war-like conditions. And since the common sense of the majority of the Swiss people has spoken a clear word and triumphed over the mass immigration initiative, many citizens of EU countries have been startled out of their lethargy and EU bondage, and have realized how unfree they really are under the EU dictatorship. As a result, more and more resistance is now beginning to stir up from the peoples of the EU, although according to our calculations, the risk of preparatory riots and civil war-like forms is already 27% for some EU peoples. It is a fact that not only in the EU dictatorship and in all the supposedly democratic states belonging to it, there are secret plans, as well as in non-EU states worldwide, that, if the already threatening riots break out, the police will no longer be responsible for maintaining order, but that everything will be effectively put down with evil military force, as is also the case in many places worldwide in non-EU states.
That is already a lot. I think the reasons for this are probably the oppressing and financially exploitative machinations of the EU and the governments of the individual EU states. When I think of the horrendous and manifold taxes that are taken from the citizens because the governments squander tax money en masse and pointlessly, because they cannot handle money but collect horrendous rewards, then it is understandable when the people stand up against their authorities and begin to defend themselves. Then there is also the enormous unemployment and the forced savings regulations imposed by EU criminals in Brussels, etc., on ailing EU countries, which means that the citizens of these countries are financially fleeced by their own governments, by imposing ever higher taxes and by state regulations which even plunder their bank accounts to a large extent. It also plays a role in the fact that the bosses of the economy and banks and other people living on horseback swindle immense and for the normal worker unimaginable amounts of millions as wages or severance pay, making them richer and turning them into oligarchs or multimillionaires and even billionaires, all at the expense of those who have to work their hands to earn their living. But there is something else. The NSA espionage of the USA, I have read, was not only carried out with regard to government people and other persons, but also with regard to the economy. Do you know what all this is all about? Somehow there must be something more than just spying behind it to know what is being done and thought politically, etc.
That is correct, because the espionage activities of the NSA, as well as other secret services of various states, which, however, are hardly ever mentioned, do not only refer to private and insignificant as well as political interests of the rulers worldwide, but the whole thing is mainly focused on military strategies, weapons, computer and nanotechnology, as well as on general economic, aerospace and space technology, but ultimately also on chemistry and medicine, etc. The reason for this far-reaching and diverse espionage is that, compared to other foreign companies, corporations, the military, and all kinds of other companies, data, formulas, and plans are stolen to gain advantages.
I am also interested in how the various so-called nuclear states dispose of their nuclear waste. And I am also thinking of nuclear warheads, which are said to have been destroyed under the disarmament treaties, especially by the USA and the USSR, or Russia. I have read that such nuclear waste, as well as other nuclear waste, explosives and ammunition, are also said to have been dumped in deep waters instead of being dismantled and destroyed. This has also been the practice in Switzerland, where tonnages of explosives and ammunition have been dumped in the Swiss lakes, which poses several major dangers for the future.
If you are addressing the USA and the USSR or Russia, it must be said that these states have in fact dumped vast quantities of tons of conventional nuclear waste, as well as nuclear explosives. Explosives and conventional bombs, ammunition as well as uranium ammunition, and also weapons at various locations in the oceans. Which means that unpredictable time bombs have been created, which could lead to devastating disasters in the future. But it is also to be said that secretly the nuclear disarmament treaties have not been fully complied with, so there are even more nuclear weapons than are claimed, including in Europe.
That was actually to be expected, but we should not say more about these things. Hence another question. What happened with the sonar technology, where a small army was involved in finding a solution?
You are, of course, thinking of the strange incidents in the center. In this regard, I forgot to inform you. Just 1 week after we last talked about it, a solution was found and the necessary equipment was installed in the area of the center. In cooperation with the sonar, we have not been able to detect any impulses of the kind you are familiar with since then. Therefore, we know that no more incidents have occurred due to such impulses.
That is indeed the case. Nothing of this kind has occurred since then. But then I would like to ask you something about table salt, sugar and alcohol, which you, Quetzal and I have officially talked about several times in all the years of our contacts. Precisely because table salt is very important for the human beings, animals, and plants, but is just as dangerous and deadly as alcohol and sugar if these substances are consumed in excess. I think that you should also make a statement about this in an open conversation. Because alcohol, sugar, and salt are not harmless, they are even life-threatening if too much of them is administered to the body, and I mean if too much is eaten or even injected. Regarding salt, you said in a conversation that the human beings of the earth eat more unnecessarily and usually 10 to 15 grams of table salt per day, which is definitely too much.
This is correct, because the normal daily requirement of salt should not exceed 3 to 4 grams for the adult and really healthy human being, and correspondingly less for children, infants, and young people according to their age and body weight. The human body is not able to produce the necessary salt components sodium and chloride, which is why these substances have to be supplied to the body, usually through food or, if necessary, through appropriate sodium chloride tablets, etc. However, if the salt dose is exceeded too much, then even 1 to 3 grams per kilo of body weight are absolutely fatal for adults, depending on the physical condition and age of the person. For infants and children in general, the lethal amount is of course much lower and also in relation to alcohol, which has a lethal effect on the human being in adults with a concentration of 4 to 6 grams per kilo of body weight. The lethal dose of sugar must also be calculated on the basis of age and physical constitution, so that the lethal dose in infants and children is also much lower than in the adult human being. Because a quantity of sugar of 35 to 50 grams per kilo body weight can cause death, even in the adult being.
Could you please explain to lay people, especially with regard to salt, why it is deadly at all?
In sodium chloride, that is to say in salt, a toxic effect is produced, which develops in the body through osmosis. This is of central importance in all of nature, especially for the regulation of the water balance of all living beings and their cells, so of the human being, the animals, and the plants.
Osmosis. My Greek has not been around since I stopped using it in 1995. Is it something like a driving force?
The term osmosis from the Greek drive, penetration, thrust, substance, is used in the natural sciences to describe the directed flow of molecules through a semi-permeable, also selectively permeable membrane bran.
What does semi-permeable or selectively permeable mean? Is it a permeability?
Semi-permeable means semi-permeable. It means that osmosis is a directed flow of molecules through a partially permeable membrane. Human, animal, and plant tissue consists of cells, which are usually surrounded by a membrane, the cell membrane. This allows water to pass through in both directions, but not certain substances such as salt or sugar. However, water is anxious that the concentration of dissolved substances is the same on the inside and outside. So, if substances such as salt or sugar cannot pass through the membrane, the water tries to compensate for the difference in concentration. This effect is osmosis, a diffusion or passage of liquid molecules through a semi-permeable membrane or wall with the tendency to equalize the concentration differences of dissolved particles on both sides. Osmosis is important for many processes in nature, especially for the regulation of the water balance of the cells of the human being, animals, plants, and animals. However, it is also used for medical and technical purposes. Every cell of the human being, animal, and plant is surrounded by a membrane which forms a barrier for the transport of substances, but not for water. Many cells, especially in plants, are in exchange with water, because they transport water from the root area to the tip of the plant by osmosis. Ripe cherries, for example, burst due to osmosis when they have been wet by rain. When preserving food by means of sugar or salt, osmosis removes water from the food, making it keep for a long time. When vegetables are boiled in water, salt is added to it to cause osmosis, because this prevents water from penetrating the vegetables. If this were not done, the taste would suffer. Osmosis can also be understood as a passive method of transporting substances from one cell to another.
If I understand it correctly, it means that salt in the body, when it is too much, withdraws water from the body's cells, thus making the body extremely thirsty and drying it out internally, so to speak, if the body is not immediately supplied with enough neutral liquid, such as water. But if this is not the case, or if the fluid intake is too late, then Ptaah is at the last, which means that life can no longer be saved. What really is a hellish thirst is something I know from my own experience. On the one hand, because of my trips through deserts and mountains during my globetrotting, but also because I ate highly salted dried meat, which meant that I had to drink liters of water for hours.
I can understand that because when I eat too much salt, my body actually dries out from the inside, which is why I have to drink a lot of neutral liquid, which also slowly reduces my thirst. However, if the salt intake is too high in the form of an overdose, then it is fatal, because a lot of liquid is also no longer helpful, which ultimately results in general organ failure, which inevitably leads to death. And this is not only true for the human being, but also for the animals and the plants. In the human beings, animals, and creatures, the worst can still be prevented by counteracting by drinking a lot of neutral liquid, as you say, while plants inevitably die.
If we want to stay with the human being, what happens organically to him when he drinks too much salt, or also when he overdoses?
The whole organic system collapses. As a result of the contraction of the muscles of the blood vessels, blood pressure rises on the one hand, and on the other hand, water accumulation or oedema in the tissue occurs, which can cause severe breathing difficulties or even cardiac arrest.
Interesting. But as I have known about your father Svath since my childhood, without salt the life of the human being and at least of many animals and creatures is not possible, because salt maintains the pressure of the fluids in the cells of the body, regulates the blood pressure, and, if I remember correctly, is also somehow important with regard to the structure of the bones.
Excuse me, I am called speaking with Anjana. I'm afraid I have to go now, dear friend. We will have to continue our pertinent conversation at another time. Farewell and goodbye, Eduard.
So be it. Goodbye, Ptaah, my friend.